Hey, if you've ever thought about joining the Motivate with Coach Camp team, I'm going to let you know something. Now's your opportunity. So right now we are taking sponsors. And if you would like to be a sponsor, hey, look at the bottom of my podcast, click that link, fill out that information form, and we are going to get back to you. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Coach Camp. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Motivate with Coach Camp, produced by Shelby Road Productions. This podcast is intended to inspire, enlighten, motivate, encourage, and lead by example. So sit down, buckle up, and get ready to grow as we dive into this week's episode of Motivate with Coach Camp.
Wake up! It's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me. It's not working out, maybe it's the chemistry. It's time to break up so I can make a better me. Better believe in your mind, cause it's everything. You can mold, shape, find almost anything. All it takes is some time and some clarity to find your identity. It's mind over everything.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Motivate with Coach Camp. I am down here in the cozy studios of SRP with Mr. Derek Mishu. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen, for the month of December, I have decided to put together a series that has no true alignment. It is just episodes that are awesome to wrap up the year of 2023. I feel like Coach Camp has had such an amazing opportunity and benefit to be able to hear so many different people's stories. And we've put these things together in different series, everything from bullying to PTSD to leadership. It has been amazing. So on these last few weeks of December, I wanted to bring in some special guests. And look, whenever I started looking down my list, my lineup of people, I swear to you, you think, oh, Coach Camp's got it all figured out. I don't always have it figured out. I just kind of let the moment come. I'll go out for a run. I'll clear my head. And it's like God speaks to me and he says, you need to reach out to Tom Mann. Now, for those of you that don't know Tom has his own podcast. He does Emergencyfd Storyline, and he's a professional media content person. I'll let him tell everything else about himself, but he's been around for a hot minute. He had me as a guest on his show, and I started thinking, I really would like to have Tom on. And at the same moment as I'm having this thought, he transitions. He's still doing his Emergencyfd, but he teamed up with another person, and my goodness, I have listened to several of these episodes. You want to talk about heart-touching, feeling, inspirational. I don't even know all the different adjectives to use. I hope those are adjectives. I'm not great in English. But she has Brave Conversations podcast that she had been doing for a long time. Her name is Miss Danni, and I'm going to let her pronounce her last name. She is joining us today from Australia. That is not a city in Memphis. That is not a city in Tennessee. That is a country, an entire continent. She is all the way in the land down under. She is with us. We also have Mr. Tom Mann. So at this time, welcome, guys. Welcome to the Motivate with Coach Camp podcast.
G'day.
G'day.
A good day.
You say that, Danny. You say it better.
G'day.
I love that. So, Danny, please help me with your last name.
Okay, so it's pronounced, well, let's just say how it's spelt, right?
Sure.
S-Y-N-O-T. So it's snot with a Y.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So the amount of telemarketers that I get up saying, is Mrs. Snot there? And I'm like, no, it's Synot. And so I get this at churches all the time, right, when I'm preaching.
Yeah.
How do you say it? Synot. You know what the funniest thing is?
What's that?
My maiden name was Rag. So if they had have hyphenated it, would have been Snot Rag.
Oh, my gosh.
We should have called our oldest son Chucky. We just should have.
I love that. Yeah, I had a neighbor. Her last name was Bird, and she married a guy with the last name of Crow. So she went from a bird to a crow. That is a true story. That is so amazing. Snot Rag. Well, Miss Danni Synot, and hey, look, I give myself some credit because I really wasn't sure, and that was kind of what I went with because I was like, well, Australia, my country accent doesn't blend well with Australian accents, but we'll see what happens. So you guys, clearly, look, I want the world to know I'm not somebody that's pretentious. I am in the presence of two professionals. You guys are pro podcasters. Y'all have been in the media content game way longer than I can even think of. So having you two on my show today, phenomenal. outrageously crazy. I can't believe it's happening. So I know, Tom, you've been doing it for a long time, and I know, Miss Danni, you had yours together. So tell me about the moment that created the situation where y'all merged to start doing Brave Conversations.
Do you want to start, Danni, or
You
how
could
do I do
start,
that?
because I think it was more exciting for you. I was just doing what God was telling me to do.
Yeah, well, I had no Danni and I met at a network, a Christian television network. She worked in Australia. I worked in America, and we met, how many years ago? 10,
Oh, man,
12?
about 10 years ago. Yeah, 10, 12 years ago.
She just happened to go in through doing some programs, some other things, and just was here in the U.S. That's kind of when I saw her. But I knew her as the Aussie girl that worked over there, and I knew her name was Danni. That was really about all I knew. And we stayed in touch. I think you emailed me constantly about equipment and different things, questions. I was doing radio here. She started doing radio after she left the network. And so we stayed in touch. That's kind of how it happened. And then somewhere in that, I guess you sent me an email. We had a Zoom call or something. And you said something to me like, hey, would you mind voicing my intros and outros? Because that's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, sure. So I did them. And then the next thing I know was just a few weeks later, she called back up. She said, hey, would you mind? And first of all, she said, for my podcast. And at that point, I was kind of like, what's a podcast?
Oh, so you didn't even know before then?
No. Oh, no.
Wow.
No. I mean, we're talking about in television, radio. I knew people did podcasts. I'm like, what's a podcast?
Yeah.
So I remember I listened to hers. Oh, it's kind of like a talk radio show. I had to educate myself. Well, I've been doing that for years, but never really thought about podcasting. And it was really Danni was kind of the inspiration. And so then I actually somewhere there, I think I started my Emergencyfd. That's because COVID hit and I was going to do some video and started my Emergencyfd Storyline for firefighters, paramedics, that targeting that group, telling their stories. And then somewhere there, Danni said, hey, would you mind co-hosting mine with me? I'm like, why would you want an American guy to, voice on, which was primary at that time, it was pretty much Aussie, podcasts. And so why don't you take over, Danni?
Yeah, so I guess, from my perspective, I already knew Tom, we'd become friends. Just listen to the voice.
Oh, he's great radio voice.
It's amazing. Awesome to start with.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was interesting because I'd already been doing, my own podcast on people's stories and real and raw and more having, rather than even conversations, it's actually just holding sacred space for people and having a coaching and counselling background. I really value vulnerability. And I guess the mantra for both our not-for-profit and for me in life has been the fact that everybody has a story. Every story matters. And we want to help people emerge stronger. And so with Tom, he was almost the male version of me, not afraid to go deep and vulnerable and, can talk his head off with a mouthful of marbles underwater.
Yeah.
And so it just made sense. And I thought, man, how much richer would this podcast be if we had a male voice? And of course, straight away, God's going, it's Tom. And I'm like, man, how would that sound like Australian and American? And what was really weird is when I asked him to voice the outros and intros, I didn't even know why God was telling me.
Isn't that something? To
use an American voice. That didn't make sense. But I just obeyed and did it. And then as the pieces came together, it was really obvious. And now, here we are on Access More and, we have a podcast and it's incredible. The whole journey's been incredible. And Tom and I, we're so much fun. We've never worked a day in our life with this podcast.
Yeah. And I refer to her as my, my twin sister from another mister.
Yeah. I heard you say that on an episode.
Because it is so true. It's just, we also are so much alike. And when we talk about things, I'm like, okay, there's something missing in her brain like it is in mine. So together, teamed up, it's really helped.
It's a whole brain.
Oh, yeah, it is. And when we work together, we're both very creative. When we work together, it's really nice because it's like I almost know where she's going and where she's talking, and she says it. But I think the cool thing is Danni was talking about earlier, so it'd be great to have someone of a male perspective. And we could ask the subjects in different ways. I'm sorry, men and women, we want to all say we're perfectly together, but we have this great,
different
wonderful
lenses.
gift. We have different lenses.
Absolutely.
That's the best way to say it.
Yeah.
And those are the strengths. And so together on this podcast, that's really amazing. She'll get to these really, Danny, you just go to those little heart things, she'll get it. And I'm kind of like, okay, let's move to the next question. We're kind of, I don't know. That's kind of how we work. And it just goes so well.
Danny, how long have you been doing podcasting?
Oh man. Be about 8 years.
8 years.
Yeah.
So that makes you an OG. Do you know what that means down here in America?
I don't know, but
original gangster. That's an original gangster. Yeah. So those people that have done this for longer than 5 years, y'all saw the vision of where the casting of pods could go. And I got news for you. Whenever I've only been doing this since November of last year, so not even quite a year yet. And when the idea was presented to me, because I'm a talker, I'm a presenter, put me on a stage, put me in front of people. I feel very comfortable. I can deliver messages. Coaching has always been it's the biggest part of my adult life was being a coach, because having that opportunity to influence others and help people become better versions of themselves was just my passion. It was my calling. I knew that was where I needed to be. And so whenever the idea was presented to me about becoming an entity on podcasting, I'm like, well, I've never done radio. I have no idea what that's even going to sound like. What do you do? How do you get guests? I was like, how do you get guests on a show that nobody knows about? And I just, I prayed about it. And I said, I think that there is a need for positive voices. And if this is the avenue that I'm being given and an opportunity to do, I would be wrong for not pursuing that. I need to take those gifts that I am given. And I feel like that talking is a gift. Again, I say this a lot, but it's true. I think that there is a way to deliver a message. And I feel like that God did give me that ability to be able to relate to other people. My wife would say, your gift is to be quiet sometimes. And I'm like, I get it, girl, because you hear everything. But in the end, it was a true calling. And that's what got me into it. So for that, I say that because now I want to know whenever you made this decision, you kind of touched on it. You needed a male voice. You wanted the male influence. Did you have a goal in mind, or was it just continue the same podcast process that you had been doing for a while? Or was there a different avenue or vision that you had for it?
No, it was exactly the same. And I think the reason being, like Tom and I have been described as peanut butter and jelly. I think it's,
you guys eat peanut butter and jelly in Australia.
Yes, some people do. It's not my favorite.
Okay.
My husband eats Vegemite with marmalade. And if you've ever tasted Vegemite, that's disgusting. I don't know how people I'm going to offend Paddington Bear fans, but I don't know how people even eat marmalade, let alone with Vegemite. But each to their own.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you on that. My ADD kicked in on that one. So you guys come together and you're like, the mission's going to be the same. The goal is the same. And ultimately, you just felt like there was going to be deeper reach, bringing this extra person in there with a different perspective.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing about it was that, Tom and I obviously had lots and lots of conversations, but the fact that there were so many parallels just in the way we think, speak, theologically, our views on things was so similar. And because we'd been able to have deep conversations, along with our spouses and stuff too, it was just everything about it made sense. And I knew that I would be able to trust him in an interview, to not gloss over things, to pick out things that I would miss, that it would bring, I guess, a wholeness to it. And, not that either of us can't do it on our own. Like you said, we're OG in media. So, it's not a thing, but a much beautiful space to share with. And I think it makes it a richer experience when we're holding that sacred space to people. And I hesitate to even use the word interview because it's really not the process that we have. It's really quite unique.
Yeah. What
God's given us. You can't kind of formalize it so much. But what's really cool about it too is Tom describes himself and I as kites, right? Like we're ADHD, we're the dreamers, we're off in every direction. But our spouses, like Vicky and Mark, they're like the keel. They're like the ones that are holding the rope and tugging us back in. And, and man, when we got together last year in the States, the four of us.
Mhm.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Like we all just love each other. We were bawling at the airport, like when we had to say goodbye, and it's just family. It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
family.
You know, I
Yep.
barely have started to get to know Tom a little bit. We shared something very, very personal to me in common. Was his son was on the Memphis Fire Department as well. He was on rescue, just like myself. So we had this connection the moment we started communicating. And hearing your story now, what I hear is we have 3 ADHD people on mics, which is dangerous. Is dangerous. And my wife would fit perfectly in line with your husband and Tom's wife because she is very introverted. I mentioned her the other day. I was doing a speech in front of maybe 30 people at a realty group, and she followed me for the day. She was off work, and I mentioned her, and immediately she got red blotches all over her face. She's like, "Why did you mention me?" She doesn't like when I mention her on a podcast, so that's all right. It's fine. She's fine. But I'm just saying. So it does sound like that there is a recipe there that kind of blends well, and you need that kind of, I would say, mutual
Somebody's got to hold the
relationship.
string. Always remember that. Somebody's has to hold the string.
Man,
Yeah.
my wife, she needs to like a come along and ratchet straps to bring me back in. But yes, I am with you. So you guys get together. How long and you said you've been doing it 8 years? Is that right, Miss Danni? You said 8 years?
Yeah, I've been podcasting 8 years, yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you about was what got you into that? Because I know part of your story. I want to get to that part of it. But what brought you down the road of deciding, you know what, I'm going to try some podcast stuff?
Yeah. Well, it actually started before I set up my not-for-profit.
Okay.
I've been, in different places around the world, speaking, media, all of that, and sharing vulnerably. Because I think that's a massive value. You give someone so much permission to open up and to heal when you share your own stuff.
So true.
Appropriately, obviously. But
yeah.
And so I was starting to just hear these incredible stories wherever I went and getting these feedback of, Danni, thanks for being brave enough to share your story. This is what happened to me. And so I thought, man, imagine being able to help. And God sort of had started to, talk to me about setting up a website where there were resources and things available for people to connect with resources. Because I'd go and inspire people on these speaking engagements and, we'd have a breakthrough with them and, I'd be there for hours afterwards. But then I felt like I was kind of like opening a can of worms up for them. And I'm like, man, when I had to work through my stuff, I needed mentors, I needed resources, I needed community, I needed someone to do life together with me. And I can't do that when I'm not in their country, not in their community, not in their space. And so a podcast was one of the things as I was, just before I'd sort of set the website up that was like, you need to get this stuff happening. And so I did. I just started actually at the television network that I was working for at the time. They let me use their studio space and I started doing some interviews, and they were just able to go really deep and raw in ways that you can't on television and radio sometimes because of the licensing and your audiences. It just allowed us to go that little bit deeper and to hold a space for a longer period of time, which, when you've got ADHD, you can go on forever. I mean, it's perfect for podcasting.
Yeah, Tom actually fell victim to that when he invited me on. I'll listen back to it, and I'm like, I don't think he said 5
3
things.
questions.
Yeah,
3 questions. His name, what he did. No, it was great.
It was great. Look, and you here's the other side of that. So when you talk to me about something I'm passionate about, or I feel like I'm pretty versed in, I don't need a lot of prompting. I just took off and ran with that stuff. It's like fire and stuff. And it was therapeutic too. So that's another part of it. And that's what I want to hit on here is what you just talked about is the fact that you kind of push back on interview. And I like that because the truth is you're really not interrogating. What you're doing is you're relating and you're sharing and you're giving a person an opportunity to, I mean, for me, it is a moment of reality when you can say something out loud. It's almost as though you're coming to a point of recognition and healing that it's hard to get there if you don't say the words. It sounds crazy, but if those thoughts stay inside your head, whatever that situation is in your life, it feels really tough to get past it because it's just on a loop. It's on a loop. It just keeps going over and over and over. And that was a big part of me whenever I got into the podcasting. I knew it wasn't going to be about me. And I shared this with you, Tom. The Motivate with Coach Camp, the with is in there because I wanted it to be about community. I want it to be about us. It wasn't me. It wasn't what I could bring to the table. It's what we could bring to the table together. I feel this way about it. When you allow another person to tell their story and then you allow them to be vulnerable and not feel like they're being judged, not only is that healing from them, but I believe it brings meaning to you. It gives you validation and meaning in your life that is profound beyond any measure that you could put words on. So Tom, you do that. So speak to that a little bit about your fire line in podcasting. How have you seen people heal from just telling? Because I just mentioned the fact you let me come on there and man, I ran with it. I don't know. You had about an hour show and I used 955,000 words. I counted them. So let's step away for just a quick second for a word from my sponsor. We'll be right back.
Boba Cream is a veteran-owned, family-friendly business serving delicious boba tea and desserts with a commitment to quality and customer satisfaction. 131 West Commerce Street, Hernando, Mississippi. Go to msbobacream.com for more information.
So what I was asking you, Tom, before we went to the break was tell me a little bit about a story that you know where people were having a hard time dealing with. And whenever we're talking about dealing with, fire and EMS and stuff, they're going through some things. They come on your show and they talk about it and then they share with you later. Man, that was really helpful.
I think some of the biggest things that I've dealt with and like she said, you're not necessarily interviewing and interrogating. Mm-hmm. I feel like you're discovering in a lot of it. And thus other people, I discover other individual stories, and I'm amazed because I see how they overcome. Okay, mm-hmm. Sorry. Okay. I got a dog.
I interviewed Tim Simpson not long ago, and he had a dog in there. But he's like, "Oh, we're gonna have a station break information." It's great.
Anyway, let me start that again. I think the thing I've learned is that it's not so much you're interviewing, and you're not, like you guys have been talking about. To me, it's discovering. You're discovering someone else's story, and I learn from it. And then I get to share. But some of the stories I guess I've discovered when you're dealing with like post-traumatic stress and things on the job, particularly firefighters, paramedics, EMTs, it's pretty intense. It's a different world. And the other thing with that is that also individuals talking about to being at the point of suicide and wanting to end their lives. Mm. And they get to share that, and then they share that with others and how they overcome or how they went down a road that was pretty difficult, whether it was drugs, alcohol, those other things. And sometimes that's pretty amazing. So I've learned so much from that, but those are kind of the tough sides of it, or a loss where they've literally lost someone that they worked with, or a family member or something that they have to deal with that loss. And I think I don't know if I mentioned to you and others, but, my son one day called me up and he was pretty down, and he was in the middle of, what he was doing. He was, working in special operations there in the Memphis area and all the other things with the Memphis Fire Department. He called me one night and he said, "Hey, Dad," he said, "this one's number 6. I'm like, "What do you mean number 6? And he was talking about how 6 individuals he knew had committed suicide in the fire department, and some there, but also in other places, like in the Air Force he was in. And, at the time, he's only like 26, 27 years old.
Yeah.
And, how do you explain that? So the thing is, when you can talk about those stories and prevent that from happening and help people unpack their issues, and we do that even with Brave Conversations, I really feel like being able to share, and as Danny says, being vulnerable with people, and that story, everybody does have a story, and the story matters. And the idea is to emerge stronger from it. So it's one thing you can tell about a story and how big and bad it was, but when you can come out of that and you can share that with people, and in a way bring people along that have never done that before. I love to hear the stories of people, just because you're not alone. And no matter what the story is, your story touches somebody.
Yeah. And that's so important too, is to feel like that whatever the struggle is you're going through in life, that you're not the first to face it, and that other people have been there, and you get strength from that. There's an expression, and I've never agreed with this expression, but there is truth to it. They say misery loves company. Well, I think that misery needs company. I think that sometimes people need to understand that what their situation is and whatever it is that they're facing is not unique to the world. Somebody else has been through that. And whenever you give them a platform to be able to tell their their story, share their moments. It shows other people what is possible, because sometimes we get lost in our own minds, not being able to realize that there is a light and you can make it through this moment. And there are people that have. And sometimes that's what we do as podcasters or as any type of digital content person. Whenever you're trying to put out a positive message, it is so crucial. I love the fact that both of you use this word, because if you go back and you watch my very first YouTube video that I ever put out, when I came to terms with the thought that I'm going to try to be a public speaker, I don't know how that's going to look. I'm really good at talking, I guess. We'll figure this out. I set my phone up on my garbage can outside and I just hit record. And I recorded me talking about what my intent was and what my goals were. And in that 4-minute speech, I had this moment where I recognized, in order for my message to be received, I had to allow myself to be vulnerable. And I say that in that video. And I remember saying that it's not just important that I'm vulnerable, but I'm transparent and I'm honest. And whenever I talk about something that hurts, I let people feel it, because it's not enough to say it. They need to understand that it's coming from your heart. And that's who I've set out to become to other people. Is I wanted to be an example that you can go through tough times, whatever those moments look like, and you can come out the other side better and stronger, and you can have a message to give others. I just had a lady on my show the other day, and she shared with me her personal story and what prompted her to go into a nonprofit. And part of her message was she realized that she needed to make her mess her message. And that was how she was going to be able to connect with other people. And I thought that is so profound. And since then, this message that I've been able to receive from others has not just helped them, it has grown me. And that is a part of what we do. And I say we because that's what you guys are in the family. We're in the family of positive podcasting through vulnerability. Now, I will say this, and then I want to come back to you, Ms. Danni. So I listened to several of the Brave Conversations. And just to give the audience out there, if you've not listened to Brave Conversations podcast, it highlights individuals that have been down extremely difficult roads and have a testimony to share. One of the episodes was about a pilot that had crashed in Memphis. That the irony to the twist.
Southern Illinois, where we are.
Oh, was it in Illinois? And your son had responded to that.
Yeah.
Your son had responded to that. So for the fact that your son responded to that guest and he comes out of it surviving, and there were so many twists and turns to their recovery, but the overall glaring message was the fact that the positive mind and the understanding of what their future held was not in their hands to begin with was profound. And it touched me a lot. And that's what podcasting can do. And that's what sharing messages can do. So Danni, I know part of your story. I listened to several of y'all's podcasts. You came from some tough background and your mess became your message. And so do you want to touch on any of that and what led you into the place that you are today to be able to have such a profound impact?
Yeah, look, I've faced a number of challenges like we all do in life. I think some of us recognize it later than others, and some of us, we're affected from childhood like I was. I was from a family where my parents were married until I was 2, then they divorced. I went to live with my grandparents and my mum, and then, rarely saw my dad, just on access visits. They both remarried by the time I was 4. Everything was good, got along with both of my step-parents, felt really loved, had all of that, good stuff going on, didn't really think much of it really at that age until they both had their own children a couple of years later. So my sister was born in the March, then my brother in the December. And so I hadn't actually met my little sister till I was 9 years old. Dad came and picked me up one day. He'd managed to get his pilot's license. Wasn't really contributing to my well-being at all, paying what we would call child support or maintenance, but he managed to get his pilot's license. So he came and flew over to where we were living, which was about a 5-hour drive away, and took me to church. And what was incredible about that was my dad was a high-functioning alcoholic. But at that point, he'd found Jesus, took me to church, had a birthday party for me, sat me down on his knee, that afternoon, told me all about my Father in heaven who loves me, gave me a big children's Bible. Then we flew back to the town I was living in, and I remember as we were saying goodbye, he just he just was, I guess, a little bit different, and I couldn't put my finger on it, and it was like my blood ran cold. It was like something's really wrong, and I couldn't articulate what it was. But I remember watching the taxi as he was driving back to the airport just go down the road, turn the corner and drive out of sight. And it was the last time I saw him again until I was 16 years old. He just cut contact. And it was bizarre. And for years afterwards, like even now, if I hear the song by the Beatles, The Long and Winding Road, I just think of that moment.
Yeah.
It's like that, The Long and Winding Road.
Yeah.
Lead me to your door. All of the lyrics in that are just phenomenal. And then after that, like, my stepdad started to become very emotionally and verbally abusive, sometimes physically. There was a number of situations that happened. If you have a listen to the podcast, you'll hear some of that. And then my mum got postnatal depression. And so she checked out too, couldn't show me any affection, would barely talk to me, ended up in hospital over it. And, all of the violent sort of stuff escalated verbally to the point that, I just went from this child that felt so loved to nothing, to having 3 major abandonments then within 3 years in different ways, and ended up with a bunch of abandonment and rejection issues. My self-worth was 0. I mean, he would scream at me and call me all sorts of names that I didn't even know what those words meant, cussing at me, very, like I just had to utter one word while we were in front of the TV eating dinner when the news was on, and I was banished to the kitchen. I had another time I cheeked him, and I ended up 9 years old being called a effing S word, and as in, like a prostitute, S word. I had my head slammed into the wall, just stuff like that. And just, when you grow up with that kind of environment, feeling so isolated on eggshells all the time, you don't realize it, but there is so much relational trauma and PTSD and anxiety associated with that. It's like a time bomb going off. And so, I was never really a naughty kid. And so it was like I never knew the boundaries of what was socially acceptable, what I should and shouldn't do. I just knew that anything I said, 1 minute I could say the same thing, 1 minute it could be that I would had my head blown off, and another time I'd get laughed at. Yeah.
I ask you to share a little bit about that. I know that you have in detail your whole story on Brave Conversations, and I want my listeners, they've heard over the course of the last year plenty of my vulnerabilities, and at the end of the day, I think everybody has their areas that they have either struggled through or they come up short in. And for me, a lot of times it was coming up short. Rather, I thought that I was doing the right things and I wasn't. I had a failed marriage. I have made plenty of bad choices in my lifetime that created situations that were less than favorable for me. And it took me having personal recognition to that to be able to start to come out of that area and become a better person myself. So my situation was very different because I had a lot of great mentorship and I had a lot of great structure. Whereas for you definitely were put into a position early in your life where it would have been easy to be the victim of your circumstances. And at some point you realized that that was not the way to go. And you realized that there was a better way of life. Share with me real quick, and then I'm going to come to you, Tom, because I want to find out some of your background story that I know that, if you want to share with my listeners, because it's so important that they hear these things from people that are out there that are positive voices. It's not like we have life figured out. It's not like we do everything right. And it's not like life is perfect for us. We struggle just like everyone else. But I think that's a big part of the messaging is recognition that we can relate. And whenever you come to us, whether they're on Brave Conversations or they're on your fire department storyline show, it doesn't matter where they come to tell their story. It's not a line of judgment. It's a line of sharing. So what point was it, Ms. Danni, that the recognition hit and you're like, you know what, I'm going to go down this path here and I'm going to create a situation where my story will help others?
Yeah. Look, I probably have to backtrack just slightly because,
Okay.
Coming out of where I did, like, probably the real saving grace was my grandmother, my mum's mum. She was always, she grew up, the kid of a grandfather and a father who were Methodist lay preachers.
Mm-hmm.
And so she had a really good moral grounding, even though she wasn't going to church anymore. If I hadn't have had that, I think, man, I would have been in some real trouble. And had I not found Jesus, like I just wouldn't have.
How
I
old were you
was
at that
looking for
time?
love in all the wrong places. Oh man, I think my turning point to Jesus, which is really weird, was about 14, and I should have been statistically. I was living in what you guys would call a Bronx. We were in government housing. I'd had all of that trauma with my family, feeling alone. I should have been into drugs and all of that kind of stuff. I was acting out in other ways though. Like I would cuss out my teachers, my parents, like anyone in the end, just to feel power, because that's the way I'd stopped the abuse with my stepfather in an incident one day. And so I became hyper independent, and I would cuss people out, and I would, do you know what I mean, get very emotional and very reactive because, of course, constantly I was being triggered about trying to protect myself and never being hurt again, which isn't reality. And I think that's the important thing to remember. Whenever we see someone acting out, no matter how they're self-medicating, no matter how they're trying to protect themselves, no matter what walls they're building up, no matter how grumpy and cranky they are, it's only ever symptomatic of the pain inside, right?
Sure it is. Yeah.
And so I think that's where grace comes in. But I think until I got to a point where I married a binge drinking alcoholic and, lost a baby, that's really the point where I just went, you know what, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to sit on the veranda every time I'm angry and drink. I'm not going to have my husband come home and pass out and vomit everywhere and clean him up and drag him into bed. And when we got ourselves together, ended up getting married, then the first wedding anniversary we find out we're pregnant, and then 18 weeks into the pregnancy we lose our baby. And that was a moment where, getting into that, the grief and the anxiety around that, to the point that I was down to 49 kilograms. I don't know what that is in pounds, but it's
about
very
100
light.
pounds, roughly. Yeah.
Yeah. Couldn't eat, couldn't drink, couldn't work, couldn't even go outside to the letterbox at one point, became agoraphobic.
Wow.
Like, it was intense, just intense. And I remember having this moment with God where he said to me, well, I said to him, God, it's okay for you. You knew that your son would die, but that you'd have him back again. And quick as a whip, Holy Spirit said, but so do you. And so as I started to heal and I started to process not just the loss of Jackson, but my life's trauma, I thought, and I found this hope in Jesus. It was like, man, I'm finding things that are working for me that I can pass on to other people. Because as a mentor, even once you become OG, right?
Yeah.
You can only take people as far as you've gone. But we have a responsibility. And I just felt like this deep calling and connection and responsibility to heal so that I could be a healer.
That is,
You know what I mean?
that is so great.
But the danger in it is you can't rescue people. And I think each
Yeah.
of us in our own healing journey need to get to that point where it actually becomes about them and our calling and not about soothing our own pain.
Yeah, I think when you share your story like that, though, it does put tools in the toolbox, so to speak, and individuals recognize that. And you know what? I think as a human, I think this is pretty safe to generalize on this. We like to see instant gratification. So you put something into something, you want to see a return. And what you're talking about is not a quick return. It's an investment. And being able to share your story like that and be so open about it and be able to recognize it, because I think that's the other thing, too. I think a lot of gifts are left on the table. People don't recognize that their process and their struggle had a purpose. Had a good friend of mine on the show, Stacy Dodd, and his story is amazing. And it's amazing because of the path he went down. Made no sense that he would come out of it. And now he is doing great things in the world. And his comment to me was that he has the gift of rock bottom. And I don't think
Yeah.
everybody has to hit rock bottom to find that gift, but I do believe that for those that have reached that deep and then come back out of it, they have a special gift to share. And your story is unique to you, but at the same time, it's a story that resonates all around the world. And you're showing that right now, because I promise you, somebody here in America is listening to this podcast. They're hearing you tell that part of your story, which is why I wanted you to share a little bit about it. And I know that there's a whole episode dedicated to it, but I wanted my listeners to recognize that, look, this isn't just isolated to your city, your town. This is the world, the whole world. They have the same types of struggles. And in the end, we are all in this together. So I appreciate you sharing those few moments about it. And I will say this, when I listened to your episode, I was blown away at how many obstacles you had to overcome at such an early age, and to be able to come out the other side. And the first thought that came to my mind was, my God, that's what my mom had to do. And one day I'm going to have her come on here and tell her story, but she had such a struggle in life. And then I see how she was able to turn it around. And my brother and I had this great life that they provided for us. And there was no sense in that. There's nothing that made sense that could happen, knowing what she came from. So I really appreciate you sharing that part. So Mr. Tom, coming to you real quick is, I want to say this is, I had no idea about this, and this was a very open conversation that you had on Brave Conversations. The irony there. I had no idea that you had an abrupt ending to a marriage, and that this sent you into a spiral of sorts. And it's totally understandable. And the fact that, you're able to share the stories about how your son has been impacted by the people's suicide. I had no idea that at one point in time you were drifting toward that piece of things. So would you mind just talking about that for a quick second?
Well, it's kind of like, I grew up in Memphis. I was in radio in Memphis. I did TV, I did all kinds of things there in Memphis. And I just had a great life for the longest time. I had 3 companies, media. A lot of people knew what I did. We worked, we did all those things. So I would say I was pretty charmed. I was blessed is the better word. And grew up in a wonderful Christian home. I had all those, strong foundations, went to a wonderful Christian school there, ECS, a big graduate there, went there 12 years. So in the area, I know exactly, where everybody's listing, especially there. And I was married, had a wonderful marriage for 17 years. And honestly, it had its ups and downs like everybody else.
Sure.
But what I guess the thing is, all of a sudden, my, former wife was going through some stuff, and I look back on it. I used to tell a different story. This is what she did to me, and she left me and whatever. But the story was, one day we went to dinner, which we were doing, and we had companies and businesses. We'd had some financial things, other things going on. And she just one day said, I just don't want to be married anymore. And I actually laughed. I thought she was joking. And again, I think sometimes, and I look back now and I'm like, I should have read, but I don't think I was mature enough as a man to really read what she was saying, what she was going through. There are things she was going through that went way back. And I look back and I feel really, on my part now, looking back at it, there are many things that I should have probably done different. You shoulda, woulda, coulda. But it was just, for me, it was being abandoned. And it took me down to the point where I literally just lost everything. Some friends there in Memphis, one of my friends who helped me during part of it, called me Job. He said, man, you're Job. It's so bad. I lost everything within 6 months. We're talking about businesses. I had to let people go that were working for me, even reputation. I wound up on one of the television stations because they had a thing and said, hey, this guy was taking money and not delivering services. And I wound up all over there. And all of a sudden, I was being sued by people, and that wasn't what it was. I lost all of my equipment, and I had to go to a friend's studio at night and try to make up and do the work. And I was like months behind. And I lost everything. So I went from having everything to nothing, and just sitting there, what did I do wrong? And then at the same time, you're missing your kids, you're missing even the wife, everything. And I remember sat there and I prayed and prayed and prayed. I sat through months and months and months till I lost my house. And I wound up losing the cars. You walk out, all of a sudden the car's not there anymore. And you lose everything financially. And it takes you down to that level. And I got to the point on 2 different occasions, I seriously was going to commit suicide, planning how to do it, knew how to do it. I knew how to do it. I'd seen how it's been done.
Yeah.
After all those years working with the fire service,
Sure.
the easy ways to do it. And I had made plans and little divine interventions. I remember I was just devastated when the kids would leave on the weekends. They leave on Sunday nights. It was so quiet. And they were with me all weekend, and it was great. And then they'd leave, and it was just like I missed them so much, missed everything. And I remember they would literally go through a depression like you've never seen with that. And I remember when they would leave, I remember that one night laying down the bed and deciding I was going to go in my life. I was going to go somewhere and do it, and nobody would find me. That was what my goal was, and just kind of disappear. And then I shut the door, and I remember just being totally in tears. And shut the door, and on the back side of the door, there were 2 Post-it notes. And my kids were young, and they'd written on there. One of them said, "Dad, I love you." The other one was like, "Dad, I miss you so much, or you mean so much to me." And there's some little things in there. And I did okay. Then I kind of recovered from that. Then some other things had happened to me, some legal things, some other stuff. And I knew I was going to lose my house. And about 2-3 weeks later, back in the same spot. And then I woke up one morning, and I heard knocking at the door. And with the door, it was my dad at the door. And my dad just never just showed up. He just showed up, and he just walked in the door, looked at me, said, "You're not going to hurt yourself, are you?" And I didn't want to admit anything. And during that time, I had wound up, because of a pastor there that I had, and I wound up going to counseling and doing some things that really helped me. But I didn't want to admit that because I was told I could lose my kids, not see them if I admitted that. So I held that in forever. I wound up having to leave, actually, Memphis, where I grew up all my life. Been there 40 years and had to leave and start all over again, and moved up where I am now in Southern Illinois. But for a long time, I'll be honest with you, I could go back and tell you that story, but I got to that point, and you can get to that point. It's understandable. I never understood how people could say, I felt like I want to kill myself. That was never in my mind or my thinking. I had such, if you want to say I was very positive, forward thinking, excited, ADD, everything's a new adventure.
Yeah.
And
True.
so I never really had that. But then that hit me, and I realized how tough and how quick things can change. And just to make the story go forward here, in that process, though, I became very angry and bitter toward my ex-wife, and I'd like to call her former wife because we're friends now.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing is that was the biggest thing I had to learn. I thought I was a person that could forgive. I had to learn how to forgive. That was a long process, and I held a lot of anger and that against her and against the whole situation, everybody, everything, and I had to walk through that. And we talk about this, but the biggest thing is being able to not only forgive yourself. And I look back, I was talking about things I could have done better. I should have seen things. I should have responded better. I mean, you're responsible for not what people do to you, but how you respond to them. And that's really only thing you can do. Well, I didn't respond properly, and I didn't respond well. And then I went down that other hole of not being able to forgive somebody. And I remember there's a little verse that came to mind one day, and it was after the Lord's Prayer. And it says, "The way you forgive others is the same way your Heavenly Father will forgive you." Boy, it's pretty big. And I thought about that because that kind of hit deep inside of me. Like, if I can't forgive, I mean, that's the essential thing to it all. And finally, I went through a process of learning how to forgive, and I had gotten remarried. My life had come back together, my new wife, and there's a story you can hear on the podcast about that, and how my wife really helped that whole situation. And again, things were restored, but in a different way.
Yeah.
And in an amazing way, because there are other kids, there are stepkids, there are all kinds of family members that were affected by that circumstance, although I thought it was all, just awful, but it's amazing how that turned around and worked for good. So that's kind of the story. And again, very details there, but that's what I went through. And it was rough. It was really rough.
The thing that you just mentioned, there's a few things actually, so I'm going to try to highlight those quickly. But the one thing about forgiveness is I heard this said once that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies.
Oh, yeah.
And it is self-destructive. And, I know that you follow a lot of my stuff, Tom. I appreciate that greatly. You've been a great supporter. And I'm not sure if you caught it, but a couple of episodes ago, I put out a thing about giving yourself a second chance. I think that in general, people do tend to be more apt to give someone else a second chance than themselves even. Now, granted, there are exceptions, but I think one of the things that we like to do is we hyperanalyze what we should or should not have done once something has already taken place. And, you know, as the expression goes, hindsight is 20/20. Well, yeah, of course it is. And you know what? We're not given a blueprint to life, and we're not given instruction manuals. And so sometimes you've got to have some heart-wrenching, difficult moments in your life come along, which will teach you lessons that you would have never gotten otherwise. Being on this podcast, my podcast, it's countless at this point, even though it's only been 1 year. I've had so many people come on my show, share their story of essential survival, even if it wasn't life or death. It was survival in a great sense, and how they would have never chosen those roads. But now they're able to use those roads that they had to go down to not just be a better person, but to help everyone else around them to be a better person. And I think that is something that you guys are doing with Brave Conversations. And, you know, one thing that I was thinking about when I was listening to some of your podcasts was, because I know for me, okay, so for me personally, it came out with, I had a handful of friends I knew that I wanted to interview because they had some great life stories, and then things started to develop, and then series started to develop, and then I sought out some people that I knew, and then I put out requests, and things have just kind of come in the direction. The second chance thing, I came up with that in a dream. It came to me in a dream that I need to put out a message about giving yourself a second chance. And I don't know if you caught the rest of that, but then it was literally, I got a turn on the radio, and there's a person talking about giving yourself a second chance. And then I go to a YouTube thing, and it's talking about second chance. And then the next day, my producer calls me. He's like, dude, this guy is running a nonprofit. It's all about giving people a second chance. I'm like, what? Get him in the studio. And the next thing I know, he's in the studio with Hope Works. And so much of it is organic in nature and God driven. So one thing I wanted to ask y'all was, Danny, Tom, how do you guys go about getting guests? How do you find your guests?
Yeah, look, there's always a combination of things. Sometimes it's, you know, someone we know that's got a great story, and you know, of course, we've both got a really big pool of those kinds of things. Sometimes it's a story that we hear, you know, and sometimes we have high profile guests too. So, you know, there's stories that we hear, you know, on socials or other networks that we just go, oh, yes, we need to get them on our podcast. And, you know, some people, you just, you know, contact them through socials, or, you know, if they've got management, you'll do that. And sometimes you get a response, sometimes you don't. You know, it's really, and we don't worry about that. We understand that everyone's busy. We've all got schedules. You know, people have got to do what's best for them. And that if a door's meant to open, we don't need to kick anything down. We don't need to hustle. Do you know what I mean? God does it.
Absolutely.
God does that. And I think a lot of things are timing too.
Yeah, that's 100% true.
Yeah.
I have had plenty of guests bail on me or deny or never respond. And the one thing that I've come to terms with early on was none of it was ever personal. And all of it is going to happen in the way it's supposed to happen, for the purpose that it's supposed to happen for. And I was curious about how other people did that, because I mean, outside of you two guys, I don't know any other people that do podcasts. So you are my new best friends in podcast world. So it's just,
and by the way, some people aren't ready to tell their stories yet.
True.
Yeah.
And they're still hurting, and they're still not there. And what's, you know, I think every once in a while I've had where I've put a bug in somebody's ear about it, and maybe 6 months later you hear about it. They'll say, oh, I want to do that. Or, you know, think and pray about it. Why don't you, you know, tell me what you think. You just think about it, and then you'll hear back from them later. And those are the kind of things that, you know, you like you said, you don't take it personal, but sometimes people aren't there yet.
Sure.
But, you know, I think that's the thing. People sometimes aren't ready, and that's okay. But sometimes they come around, they are. And then usually they'll hear somebody else. And there are other individuals that, you know, we're not like you know, I think we've said before, Danny's talked about this. It's not that we're really interviewing people as much as we're discovering their story. And sometimes people in the process actually go, wow, that's pretty amazing. I did walk down a neat road. I'm like, yeah, you really did. And we got to walk with you on that. And that's really what it's about, because we can share with others and let everybody know that you're not alone, and that we do have this experience in this not perfect world, fallen world. And things aren't always perfect. And despite what I thought early in my life, it was wonderful. Money came off trees and everything else. No, it doesn't work that way. It's different. And it's walking down that. And that's one thing I think what we do with our Brave Conversations podcast. And anyway, even the story of our, how we got this thing got going is really amazing. So it's just so neat that there are opportunities and they come.
Yeah. And, I wanted to finish up what you were saying a while ago about how you sunk into that dark place real quick, the capstone to it, because I went down one road and then got distracted and then a dog barked. I don't know. But I wanted to just point out this, that, you point out how life was good and things were great. And then it took almost just like a blink of an eye, if you will, where you found yourself in a dark spot. And I want that message to resonate with somebody out there that's listening to this, to understand that, don't think that it's odd for you if you have always felt like you were put together and then suddenly you feel like your life has fallen apart and you can't seem to figure out how to put the pieces together and you don't know how to move forward. Just know that it can be better. You just have to have faith. You have to work forward. You can't look back. You have to understand that things will happen for a purpose. You're living proof of that, sir. If you hadn't continued to push forward, you think about the lives that you've touched up to this point since those days. Think about all of that would have been erased. And that's that's the message I want to give anyone out there right now that's struggling with depression, anxiety, feelings of suicide. I speak from a very personal perspective. I have had many friends and family members commit suicide over the years. Unfortunately, I lost a nephew a few years back. This is something that no one is immune to it. That's the thing. No one is immune to it. So if you are listening to this message right now and you're going down those difficult roads and you feel like you're sinking into those places, I want you don't have to take my word for it. You just heard it from Tom. It can happen to anybody. So don't feel like that you're some kind of oddball, that this is happening right now. I want you to understand that this does happen to anybody. Reach out to someone. Reach out to somebody right now and get some help. Because I promise you, whatever that next step in your life is, you will use these dark moments that you might be going through to help the next person that needs you, just like Tom shared with me just now. Would you agree to that, sir?
Oh, absolutely. I sure would. Totally agree with you on that. I can't
Can
say
I just
anything
add
any
to
different.
that?
It's so good. Yeah, go ahead, Danny.
Yeah, can I just add to that? Too, and I've been there too. There was a particular telegraph pole I used to drive by every day when I was in the midst of my worst anxiety, and I would think about coming around that bend and taking myself out.
Wow.
And I think it was probably just the thought of my kids and maybe not finishing myself off properly that stopped me from doing it. But the only thing that happens if you choose to make that decision and you choose to go down that dead end road is that you guarantee that things will never get better.
That's true.
That's actually how it ends up the worst. And we sit with things sometimes when we're in pain and we sit there and we're so angry. But, if we sit with anger long enough, we realize the real name's grief, right?
That's
And
so
people
true.
are inspired by our victories, but they connect with our weakness.
Yeah.
And so I would say if you're in that place, get connected.
Yeah. Yep. Learn your
connected,
purpose.
stay connected, find your purpose, the big one. If you don't know why you're alive, man, that's half the problem. And you are loved. You are so loved. And God didn't put you on the planet right in this very moment to have all of the experiences you've had, even the crap, to leave you there.
Yeah.
He's going to use it. It's like the pumpkin.
Yeah.
There's a guy in the UK just grew this massive pumpkin. It was like something like 1,200 kilos, right? Which is probably like 18 times of my weight. Massive. And someone said to him, how do you grow this big pumpkin? He said, well, I put 5 watering cans of water on it a day and then like a ton of cow manure. And I'm like, oh my gosh, isn't that true?
Such a metaphor.
It's the crap that makes us grow, right? We hate it. But you know what else it is? It's the living water. It's Jesus. It's that life-giving water, and you've got to have that.
Absolutely.
And I tell you what, you'll grow. You'll grow like this big fat pumpkin, and then you feed like a whole bunch of people.
Yeah.
And then there's all these seeds in there, right? Like how many pumpkin seeds are in a pumpkin? Hundreds. Then those seeds go out and they make more pumpkins and they grow a bunch of pumpkins. And that can be you. You can be the one that breaks the chain and starts the legacy of healing.
And then
you don't just be a
impact is
survivor,
forever.
you become a thriver.
Yep.
And you save lives, just like people have stepped in and saved yours, whether it's someone that mentors you or someone listening to Coach Camp podcast. You have a purpose, you have a journey, you have a story, and it matters. It matters.
Absolutely. You know,
So
that's the one thing that about this journey that I have been on myself with this podcast stuff is I had no idea what I was in store for. And I thought at that point when I started, I was like, I'm going to be this positive message and I'm going to try to make sure that whatever it is I'm putting out there is something other people can grow from. Little did I know that it was never going to be me. It was always going to be my guest coming in here, because in the end, one person's story will not always resonate with the next, but somebody else's will. And that's what we need, is each other. And man, I just cannot tell you how thrilled I am to be able to have these moments, to be able to share this time on a microphone with two true professionals. And what time is it in Australia right now?
It's 9 o'clock in the morning.
9 in the morning. So this is tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow morning
Yes.
there, yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
the world's still spinning,
yeah.
just so you know.
I'm just curious. So what should I expect for tomorrow?
You can expect a sunny day.
Oh, I like that. That's awesome. I've never been able to look into the future.
Kangaroos.
That is in kangaroos.
Yeah. I don't know. So I just walked outside. Nobody can find my DeLorean. I don't know how I got here.
Yeah, it's amazing. I've never had an opportunity to speak to somebody in the future. So this is actually truly my first time. I almost did. I was in Saudi Arabia for a minute, so I was close. Because I was a pretty far stretch at one point, but not on the other side of the earth. So Miss Danni, Mr. Tom, look, I could talk to y'all forever. It turns out when you have ADHD, you have a podcast time and you know how to talk. It's easy. Conversations are not hard. I had a guest on last night that I was interviewing. He's like, how long would this take? I said, well, we usually do 45 minutes to an hour. He goes, well, I hope you got a lot to say because I've only got about 5 minutes. I said, don't you worry about that. Don't you even worry about that. I got so many words to use right now. So as we start to wrap up, Tom, I want to start with you. We'll finish with Danni. What would you have my listeners, what kind of last message would you give to them?
I think no matter what you're going through or where you've been or what the situation is, you can always realize that many of the things that we go through are temporary moments, and those moments are building moments. And I really believe God uses those to tell our story. And the most powerful thing is being able to tell your story. Again, I think we think about Jesus in the Bible. He told stories. He said the kingdom of God is like this. He did parables. They were stories and they were powerful. And your story, like we say in the podcast, Danni, says this every podcast we have, everybody has a story. A story matters, emerge stronger. And that is the thing. You may be in the middle of it, and that's the hard part. It really is. I mean, there's not fun when you're going through stuff, no matter what it is. A loss of any kind, it can be anything. It can be a mental thing. It can be anything. Everybody gets that. But the fact is, you can come out the other side. And when you take those things and realize that you went through that so you can help somebody else, you can matter to somebody else. You can relate to somebody else. Your story, your situation, there is somebody else that needs to hear that needs your wisdom after you've been through that. And look for people, if you're going through it, that have been through things like you've been through. And don't be afraid to ask for help, no matter what it is. None of us are tough enough to do this alone. And that's true. And again, there's, like Danni said, there's a God in heaven that loves you tremendously, and you value and you matter.
Absolutely. That is well said, sir. Well said. Well, Miss Danni, what would you, if you could add to any of that, what would you leave my listeners with, all the way from the land down under? I mean, look, this is a unique situation. I don't know. You're probably my furthest guest I've ever had come onto the show, obviously. So it's like magic. We're here together in Hernando. What would you leave my listeners with?
Man, I would just say to you, you're not an accident and you're not here by accident. You do have a story that matters. It matters to you, it matters to God, and it matters to the people that you're going to reach. And so don't give up. Don't withdraw. Reach out and know that, you're listening to this podcast right now for a reason. It's not an accident that you've switched on your phone or your radio or however it is that you're listening. You're here in this moment because God is speaking life into dead places. He's calling those dry bones to come alive. And I just want to speak that over you right now. Wherever you've been, wherever you think you can't go, oh man, it's not all that God has for you. He's got something super special, super powerful, so super big in all the right ways. Get healthy, eat well, sleep well, get connected. Make sure that you're looking after yourself spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally. Do everything you can on that front and find your purpose. Find what you're here for and make that biggest mess your biggest message.
Amen.
Because there's so much for you to do and be.
Man.
And you are loved.
That
you
is
are so loved.
You guys right now, I don't even know. I want to hug you. And I can't because we're on TV screens. But
we're good.
Man, I absolutely love this opportunity to share this moment. And thank you so much for coming on my show, both of y'all. If Coach Camp can ever do anything for you guys, look, reach out to me. I would love to be able to help in any way possible because community is what is so important. And like you said, you can't do this alone, man. We need each other 100%. So thank y'all again. And I wish you well. And to my listeners, I just want to say this, guys. That's the purpose of this whole platform. So if any of these things have reached you or touched you in any way, look, send some messages. Give me some positivity because I got news for you, man. Your feedback matters to me too. So I love that about this whole process. Thank y'all for tuning in. Thank you for being faithful listeners. Continue to subscribe and share. Go to my website, motivatewithcoachcamp.com. And until next time, Coach Camp out.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up, it's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me. It's not working out, maybe it's the chemistry. It's time to break up so I can make a better me. Better believe in your mind, cause it's everything. You can mold, shape, find almost anything. All it takes is some time and some clarity to find your identity. It's mind over everything. And when I feel like this, I'm immortal. 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 Don't be scared. Stepping up, don't be I'm so gone, no I'm never turning back. I won't stop, I'ma fight until there's nothing left. It's so on, you're gonna be hurting bad. Cause I've been to hell and back. You don't wanna make me mad. I stay strong, you will never see me crack. And if you get in my way, you're gonna feel the wrath. Gotta say it to my face while he's looking back. Mirror breaks after math. When I hate, I attack.